Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
2 weeks ago, we had as our guest Michael McGivney, and we're pleased that after a week doing something else, we have him back. And we introduced him 2 weeks ago as America's foremost quick change artist, and he's worked in vaudeville and film and television, and he also has done a lot in what we call lighting design and production manager for really famous groups as he traveled around. And Michael, it's such a pleasure to have you back, and we just couldn't get it all done in one show. And in fact, we could do several months with the fascinating life you've had.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate having me back.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists. First of all is Janelle Burke, an attorney in the state of Idaho. Next to her is Erna Reinhardt, Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Welcome back, Michael. It was fascinating to learn about your early life, and the arts sort of progressed from vaudeville into films and eventually into television and other mediums. And so can you tell us a little bit about how your life progressed in those various fields?
Well, as I said, I think I mentioned, I went on tour with Shipstead Johnson Ice Follies, and I was basically a cue caller for the follow spots in the lighting side of that show. And they wanted to train me on sound, and I did a lot of that and ended up with tapes running through and not stopping at the right time in the show. So I realized I didn't have much talent for audio. But I was the assistant stage manager, and I seemed to be pretty good at that, and the cue caller. And within a year, the fellow who had actually designed the show left, and they asked if I would take over and light the show for them, which I did. And as a result of that, I sort of started reading books and looking at other people's work to get an idea of what lighting was all about. And my second, or perhaps my major career in life, was as a lighting designer for what I call live entertainment. Ice shows, the middle-of-the-road Las Vegas singers, recording artists, and then eventually in magic, and I've done quite a bit of that. Even most recently in China, I went over to China and lit 2 shows over there, which is another whole story in itself. But I was fascinated with lighting and production, and I was successful at it. I thought I wanted to be an actor, but the phone call that came in were always about lighting a show or taking on. What happened when I was working with singers like Johnny Mathis and Andy Williams, somebody has to sort of be the team leader as the tour manager, and I got involved in sort of as the organizer of how everything went onto the stage, how we traveled. And that turned out to be great. I've talked to students here. I've taught lighting classes here at NIC. And somebody would say, well, why would I be interested in being a lighting designer? I said, I got to see the entire world at somebody else's expense and had opportunities and invitations to meet people that I never would have done in other circumstances. So I said, lighting is a very interesting field.
Just a quick question before we go to Erna. When you were traveling, did you travel with the individual who was the star, so to speak, or did you travel separately with the lighting equipment and the audio and all of the other things that have to go into a show?
Actually, with people like Johnny Mathis and Andy Williams, yes, we actually traveled as an entourage. Part of that was when the star was out in public, he needed to have people around him, he or she. Needed to have people around because we were, at regular airports traveling from place to place. So yes, we did travel with them, and it was first class, so it was rather nice.
Erna Reinhardt.
Share with us, Michael, some of the logistics that are involved with doing a lighting show, and what's all involved with doing that design as the venue changes from place to place to place?
Well, that's the whole point. If you go into Las Vegas, there is a plethora of equipment. It's all state-of-the-art equipment. So you can pre-plan that. You can send a lighting plot ahead of time, and then you just come in and do your final focuses for it. But if you're on tour playing, say, the Opera House here in Spokane, and then you're doing the Fifth Avenue in Seattle, each venue is totally different in size and space. So you have to have kind of a basic plot, and then you send that in ahead, and then you start adding in whatever you need for special effects, depending upon what the equipment happens to be in the theater. On the other hand, if you're a big enough star, then you do a lighting plot, and the local promoter has to provide the entire situation, which of course they always say they will do, and then they don't. And so then you have to improvise on the spot. And then traveling in foreign countries, you need somebody to translate for you. So that was always very exciting.
And share with us how technology has changed that, because now all of that is computerized. Is that correct?
It's just amazing and exciting and fun to work with. And I think more and more shows travel with their total setup for that reason. It takes so much time to revamp every time you go into a place, where if you have your own design, you have your own computers, you have your own intelligent light sources, as we call them. All you have to do is set it up, and you push the button on the computer, and it all goes well, so long as the power is the same. You go to China, then you have to start with their equipment, because it's 220 over there.
Thanks.
I always think that our viewers love some visuals along with our conversation, and in a moment we're going to show some photographs that you have. And really, in these photographs, there's a series of things. First of all, as we talked 2 weeks ago when you were here, as this remarkable quick change artist, you've been called America's foremost quick change artist, and your father, the world's most famous quick change artist. So some of the photographs will show you in doing that in character. But also, we have some photographs that will deal with your lighting design and how you do that, and also your production management as you went with some of these groups. So with that introduction, I would ask our staff, our wonderful staff, to put up, we're going to do 10 photographs, and here's the first one.
This is me as a young person. I was probably about 17, and my brother and sister are working with my dad, and I'm watching. He's training me on certain moves and certain positions in the quick change Oliver Twist set. He was about 72 at the time.
Yes, he was in his 50s when you were born. I guess. Yes. So we're going to nail this photograph number 2.
And again, this is an introduction picture of me as an introduction to the Quick Change Act, to the Oliver Twist, speaking from the book of Charles Dickens.
You would do that before you moved into the other characters.
Yeah.
That was the beginning.
The idea was always to establish who you were as a human being before you went into all these melodramatic characters.
Yes, that's great. And number 3.
This was, I did a one-man show. We had 27 characters. There were 100 changes in a 90-minute show. I'll never do that again. It came to the idea. I wanted to do what I call like a college tour, and so we had to get some notoriety to do that. And so in order to get notoriety, we had a Guinness World Record of the number of changes you could do in
You're lucky to be here with us. All that. The next photograph.
That was a clown. This, of course, was Science Fiction Film Awards were honoring special effects, and they mentioned Lon Chaney, and I did 3 Lon Chaney characters. This is Phantom of the Opera, and the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and one of the clowns from Laugh Clown Laugh.
And our 5th photograph.
And that's was my favorite character as a child, as I say, when I first began, because that was the Artful Dodger who was a child. Then Fagin became my most favorite, and he kind of took over the drama of the show.
And our next one?
This was Skatefest Alaska with Dorothy Hamill. Dorothy Hamill was an Olympic champion in, I think, 1976. But she took a number of skaters to both Fairbanks and Soldotna.
And your role in that was?
And I was the lighting designer. So we had to pick up all of our equipment out of Anchorage and truck it to both to the Fairbanks and then back to Anchorage, and then flew it down to a place called Soldotna. They had ice rinks, but they had no equipment in them for shows.
And she certainly was very, very famous.
Oh, yes, and a great fun to be with. This is Shipstead & Johnson Ice Follies. I always like that particular cover because it's lit from follow spots in 6 angles, and that was
and you were
that was my first cover.
You were with them for about 5 years, isn't it?
I traveled with them for 3 years, and I was actually their lighting designer for almost 10 years, from 1963 to 1971.
You are a very Renaissance person. You know, all these different talents.
Oh yes, well it was fun, and the shows, of course, were quite spectacular. After that, I went to work for the singers, as I mentioned, like Vicki Carr and John Davidson and Andy Williams. This is from a theme park production of the Haunted Theater, produced by Mark Wilson. And it was a wonderful little sort of Victorian Gothic storyline magic show.
That is really, really impressive.
Yeah, and we actually had Christmas lights that we stuck on a wall and put a scrim in front of it, so it doesn't look like what it really is.
Yes, that was great. And the next photograph is.
Well,
here he is.
Doug Henning. Doug Henning was absolutely, what a character. There's just so many things to say about Doug. Doug was, up until that point, magicians were usually in a top hat and cloak and dark. And all of a sudden, out came Doug Henning on television with, he was a flower child of the 70s, the late 60s, early 70s.
So that's the influence from the 60s.
Everything was in rainbows and unicorns, and he was like a kid in a toy shop. He created wonder, and he certainly did. He was very inventive, very energetic, highly involved in transcendental meditation. That was a major part of his life. And it was always difficult to get the show started because Doug always meditated before his show, and you didn't know exactly how long that was going to run.
You can see it in his eyes there.
Yeah. And his opening number had a lot of fire, and all of these flames had to be lit within a certain timing, so it was always very exciting. By the time the show got off, the hardest part was getting it started.
Yes, and then the 10th photograph, here you are with Johnny Carson.
You know, this, I was doing a performance of the Quick Change Act out at Magic Mountain in Valencia, California, and had the opportunity to be on the Carson show. And you're a wonderful talk host. I mean, this is all very comfortable. But the first time I was on the Carson show, I mean, it was such a Hollywood icon.
Yes.
And he was absolutely amazing. He just put you right at ease from the very beginning. There was just something intuitive in him, how he just made you feel like you were the most important thing on the stage at the time.
He's in a class by himself.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah.
And those who follow him, they're very popular now, but they all admit that Johnny Carson was one of a kind.
It was just, it was within his being. It was just a natural place for him to be, and he just made everybody enjoy being on the show. And then I actually got to do several, what I call demonstration character changes. And he, and actually being interested in magic, was very receptive to it.
Yeah, and he had a great sense of humor. I was so spoiled with that. I've never enjoyed it to the same extent I did after he left. Janelle Burke.
To do a production, a musical event, it takes a lot of work, and there are a lot of people involved. Tell us who all the characters are behind the scenes that are working on this production.
Well, if you're dealing in the world of magic, it so often starts off with the illusions. There are builders that are specifically trained in magical arts as to props. Naturally, there is a director, somebody who is looking at the entire production and is the eyes for the magician. The magician himself or herself, although most of the time it's himself, comes up with the concepts and how he wants to be presented, but he needs a director out in front in order to make that happen. Choreographer, it's all about the dancing ladies and the guys lifting and moving things around, which create the distractions necessary for the illusions to work. I was the lighting designer and the production manager. In other words, the person who tries to keep all of these very, very talented people all focused in on the same thing at the same time. Then, of course, you have all your transportation people. You have backstage, you have special assistants that come in to work with the magic illusions, and there's always a tiger.
And you have to have special costumes?
Costumes is a huge part of it.
Now, do you know what color the costume is going to be, or what color we're generally going to do things in before you design your lighting?
In the case of Doug Henning, he started off, say, in January with a new show. And so naturally you sit down with there's a production meeting with the costume designer and the scenic requirements that are necessary. I probably didn't even mention that. Scenic artist, now there's a field. We'll talk about that a little later on. As to what are the looks of the show. So yes, color is very important. Most important is what are the illusions, because lighting has so much to do with making those illusions work. Yeah.
Erna Reinhardt.
There are so many things that I'm sure need to happen perfectly to make a show come off without a hitch, and I'm sure that there's probably several hitches that you've witnessed. Is there one that you could share with us? Maybe is a little glitch that you remedied and everything came out fine?
Well, we say there's in the world of magic, it's either magic or mess. There's no in between on it. We were doing a show at Lake Tahoe with Doug Henning, and the very finale of his show, it's a series of people vanishing and appearing out of a box in the center of the stage with nothing else around it. And you can see all the way around it. At the very end of the show, the box is all closed up and spun around. They pull it down stage and they open it up, and there's an 800-pound Bengal tiger. Well, in the process of putting the tiger into the box, and I won't go into how that happens, but there's a tether line, and the magician, the assistant that was dealing with the tiger sat down too quickly, and he wasn't able to tether the tiger to the box. So the minute minute it realized that it was up and free, and Doug was there waving around, the tiger stood up and actually was just getting off the box. But so Doug was a little person, and he just knocked him flat on the floor and licked his face. Well, of course, when he licked his face and Doug felt this wet, he thought, I'm dead. I'm dying. And fortunately, backstage, the girls came running on to do their dancing number, and the trainer got in there quite quickly, and the tiger was wonderful. I mean, it wasn't attacking or anything like that, but it all gave us an exciting moment. And Bob Hope was in the audience and came backstage, and he said, that was pretty amazing how you handled all of that. And he said he remembers once in the studio that they were doing a big bear. They were doing he and Bing Crosby were doing this scene, and they were hiding underneath the rug when the bear came into this cabin in the wintertime. And it was a comedy sketch, and of course they all explained what was going to happen and where the bear was going to go and nothing to worry about. And he said, I'll be darned if that bear didn't come and just stand right on me. And he said, after I soiled my shorts and they got the bear away, he said, it took us a while before we did the scene again.
You
Wow.
just can't
Animals
get animals to do
animals
everything they want.
always come up with some unique
A quick footnote that goes way back on this program at 35 years. The first 13 years of our program, our executive producer was Pat Richard, who, her and her husband had spent most of their life in Hollywood and television and in films, in technical roles. And she said that when she first got to Hollywood, she wanted to be an actress, and so she got these part-time jobs, and one of the jobs she got was with a magician one evening, and she had to wear an evening dress and very long earrings. And she asked him, well, what am I supposed to do? She said, well, you come out on stage and you move your head very, very much and let people watch those earrings while I do certain things. So there's a detraction that takes place with magicians, isn't there?
Yes, we call that misdirection.
Oh, okay. Well, she had a very interesting, it was her last performance in that particular category. I want to talk for a minute about your experience with, and actually even how you met your wife. You were touring with Peggy Fleming, who's another very famous person, and I believe in that case that you were, again, doing lighting design and all. And for the viewers who don't know, Judith, who works here at the college, your spouse, she's just an incredibly wonderful human being. And tell us that story about what you did with Peggy Fleming and how you met Judith, your wife.
Well, I was on tour as the company manager as well as the lighting designer for Peggy Fleming, which meant that you had to deal with all the personal problems of the actors and the technicians on the tour. And at the time, Peggy, her husband was Greg Jenkins. Dr. Greg Jenkins was on the West Coast, and she was on the East Coast doing these theater in the rounds. And so not having her husband around, she would have a tendency to get herself into, she loved to race cars, and Porsches were one thing. So we would come into a town, and the local provider there would say, oh, I've got a connection, we've got you a Porsche to drive around in the week. So the person who was the wardrobe person on the show was about to leave, and I talked to the stage manager, and I said, we need to find somebody to work with Peggy as, primarily as a costume person. He said, I just met this wonderful gal. She's just graduated from Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. We can get her down here in a minute. She can make things. She's a designer. She can sew things. I mean, it's just amazing. I said, I don't care if she even knows how to deal with wardrobe. I need somebody who will be kind of a pal to Peggy. So in came this wonderful person called Judith Hudson, and she was absolutely the perfect person to be with her. The only trouble was they both got in troubles together. And it's strange because when you think of Peggy Fleming, I mean, she's so beautiful and so lyrical as a skater, and she speaks very well on these shows with the skaters, but she actually was a very shy person. And anytime there was publicity calls, Peggy was not thrilled about being in front of the camera. She kept saying, well, why do I have to do this? I said, well, Peggy, it's your show. The only reason the audience is coming in to see the show is because of you. So they want to know about you. So I would always go on these publicity interviews with Peggy. And they would ask a question, and she would give a pat answer. And then I would have to fill in the blanks by saying, and what Peggy really is trying to tell you is blah, 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 blah.
And you met
she was
Judith,
fun. But that's where we met, and then after the show, we ended up in California. She came out and started to work in television, and we became good friends. And eventually, she became my wife.
And you moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and
oh, well, that's a whole other career.
And you're working here now, and so is Judith. But I just have to make a connection here, is that if that all hadn't happened, thanks to you getting her for Peggy Fleming, we wouldn't have Judith here to do all these costumes for the popcorn forum. That's very important.
Yes, it is.
That's a great story.
Yes, it is.
Janelle Burke.
Well, you mentioned that you were a company manager. What all does it take to make a show go for the company manager? Is that the person who kind of keeps people in line?
The company manager is the business exec for the touring group. Okay. Payrolls are the most important thing. If your actors or techs are not paid on time, they're not happy. You also have to provide for how they get their checks cashed. You're in different cities. Of course, these days it's all electronic, but Back in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't quite as easy, and you had to make connections to all the local banks. The other thing, you had to deal with the local promoters. You had to check into the box office and make sure that what they were selling was at the right price and that the tally sheets were all accurate. And then you would be reporting back to somebody like Bob Banner Associates, who were the managing team for Peggy, to make sure that all that was correct and accurate.
Did you set up the accommodations too, and travel arrangements, or were those set up
Sometimes,
as
but a lot of
other people?
times that was handled with the travel agency, especially with the Banner Group. They were out of Beverly Hills. They had very strong connections to travel agents that set up most of that.
All right, Hart.
We don't have very much time left. We have a couple minutes, but another thing that you've done is set design. And I believe we have some sets here that our camera people can show. If you could explain a little bit about what that involves.
My wife and I came up to Coeur d'Alene to, I want to call it semi-retirement, because we certainly weren't at retirement age at the time, but we got involved in the Coeur d'Alene Summer Theater, and Judy got involved in, this was last year's production of Peter Pan. This was the opening set. But I came in as a lighting designer, and then when the set designer left, Roger Welsh, who is the artistic director, asked would I be interested in Judy. We were doing a production of Camelot, and Judy said, I'd like to do Camelot. That's in Annie, that's Daddy Warbucks' mansion with the big staircase.
So you just had incredible diversity in your occupation, and you've brought that here to our institution, North Idaho College, and the Summer Theater. By the way, I understand that USA Today recently indicated that our Summer Theater is one of the top 10 in the country, and you and Judith and the director, everyone has a lot to be proud of, and we congratulate you.
Good.
Michael, on behalf of our panel and our staff, we thank you for 2 weeks ago being here and being back today. What a remarkable human being you are, and you were so cooperative, and you're so kind, and we are grateful that we could share you with our audience throughout the Pacific Northwest and throughout Canada. Our program goes there also throughout that country. Again, good luck what you're doing, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've so enjoyed bringing you these programs. It's just been a delight. We hope you'll be with us again next week when we change to yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.